A man who has been told since childhood that he belongs nowhere will eventually do one of two things: believe it, or find the one place that proves it wrong. Aurelio Ibarra chose the second, though he would not have called it choosing, because at the time it felt like the only road left with any road in it at all. If you believe that the land we are given is never truly empty, subscribe to Cuentos del Viejo Campo and ring the bell. Every story here is for someone who needed to hear it. Leave us a comment and tell us where you're watching from. He was 26 years old when he bought the rancho. His money was $4.30, the price that the municipal land office had assigned to the property. After 11 years of abandonment had made it, in the opinion of the clerk who filed the papers, effectively worthless. The clerk had said as much, not unkindly, in the particular tone of someone who wants you to know they are doing you no favors. The well was dry. The roof was down on the eastern side. The land was caliche and scrub mesquite all the way to the arroyo, and the nearest water of any reliability was 6 kilometers south. For $4.30, the clerk said, Aurelio was buying a problem. Aurelio signed the paper and walked out into the white Sonoran sun and stood for a moment with the deed in his hand, and then folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of his shirt, next to the only other thing he kept there. A photograph in a cracked wooden frame, small enough to fit in a palm, showing a woman he had never met standing in front of a ranch gate with her hand on the post and her eyes on something outside the frame, as if she were watching for someone who was about to arrive. He had been told the woman was his grandmother. He had been told nothing else. The story of how Aurelio Ibarra came to be standing in front of a land office in Sonora with $4 and a photograph was the kind of story that moves through a person's life like water moves through caliche, slowly, finding every crack, going deeper than expected. He had been born in the town of Alamos to a mother who died when he was 3, of causes that nobody had explained to him in any satisfying way, and left in the care of his father's family, the Ibarras, who were not a cruel family in the manner of people who intend harm, but were a family that had decided, by the time Aurelio was 7, that he was not quite theirs in the way that counted. He was fed. He was housed. He was not unkind to. But there is a kind of not belonging that operates through omission rather than cruelty, and Aurelio had grown up immersed in it, the way a plant grows in soil that has most of what it needs and lacks one particular mineral that nobody can quite identify. He left at 17. Nobody stopped him. He spent 9 years working whatever work was available across the state: cattle crews, fencing, harvests, the occasional construction job when the ranches had building to do, accumulating nothing much except a particular knowledge of the land that comes only to people who have spent a great deal of time alone on it, and a capacity for silence that had started as protection and become, over the years, something closer to preference. The photograph he had found at the bottom of a box of his mother's things that the Ibarra family had given him the day he left, with the particular efficiency of people relieved to have the task completed. The box had contained a dress, a tin of dried herbs, a rosary so worn the beads had gone oval, and the photograph. He had looked at it for a long time that first night and then put it in his shirt pocket, and it had stayed there through 9 years of Sonoran work and weather. The frame going cracked at the corner, the image going slightly soft, the woman's face remaining clear, the hand on the gatepost, the eyes on whoever was coming. He did not know who she was watching for. He did not know. When the land office clerk handed him his deed and told him he was buying a problem, that the rancho the deed described was the same one in the background of the photograph. He found out 3 weeks later. The rancho sat at the end of a dirt track that branched off the main road 6 kilometers north of the nearest town. At the base of a low ridge of volcanic rock that cut the worst of the western wind and made the small valley the track ran through feel contained particular, like a place that had decided to be itself regardless of what happened on the other side of the ridge. The mesquite and the palo verde had moved in during the 11 years of abandonment and turned the old approach into a corridor of gray-green scrub. And when Aurelio walked it the first time with his pack on his back and Pinto ranging ahead, reading the ground with his nose, it did not feel like arriving somewhere new. It felt, and he would not have known how to say this out loud, but the feeling was distinct, like returning somewhere he had no memory of leaving. What remained standing was the main house. Thick adobe walls that had survived the roof's partial collapse with the stubbornness of things built to last longer than the people who built them. And a stone-walled corral that needed repair, but was structurally sound. And the well, which was dry and deep and had a carved stone cap that was the finest piece of work on the entire property. The kind of cap a man carves when he expects the well to matter for a long time. He ran his hand across the carved surface that first afternoon. Whoever had made it had not hurried. He set his bedroll inside the main house, in the corner where the roof was still intact, spread the photograph on the windowsill where the last of the daylight could reach it, and took out the rosary from his pack, the oval beaded one from his mother's box, and set it beside the photograph. Then he went out to walk the land before dark. The first week was assessment. He walked every meter of the property, which took 2 days, and came back with a clear idea of what he had. More than the clerk had suggested, less than he needed. The caliche was real but not total. There were sections along the arroyo where the soil had depth enough to work. The scrub mesquite, which the clerk had listed as a liability, was in fact a resource if you knew what to do with it. And Aurelio, after 9 years on Sonoran land, knew what to do with it. The roof could be repaired. The corral could be repaired. The well was the problem. He went down into it on the 4th day, lowered on a rope he rigged from the main beam of the corral gate, with a lantern tied to his belt. The well was 8 meters deep and dry as bone, the stone walls clean and well made, the bottom covered in the fine pale dust that accumulates in places where water once was and is no longer. He ran his hand along the bottom stones, feeling for what the builder had felt when he chose this spot, looking for the logic of it, because a man who carved a cap that fine did not choose his spot without reason. His hand found the seam on the 3rd pass. It was subtle, a line in the stone floor of the well, slightly different in color from the surrounding rock, running east to west across the full diameter. He pressed along it. In 2 places, the stone gave slightly under his palm, not structurally, but in the way of stone that has water moving beneath it. That has been, all this time, separated from the surface by a layer of debris and dried sediment that 11 years of abandonment had packed in place. He climbed back up and stood in the white afternoon sun for a long time, thinking about what that seam meant and what it would take to reach what was below it. What was below it, he did not yet fully understand. But in the well cap's carved stone, he had noticed something on the way back up that he had not registered on the way down. An inscription, small and careful, on the underside of the cap's inner lip, where it would only be seen by someone who was already inside the well, already looking up. He had not been able to read it in the lantern light. He went back down that evening. The inscription was 4 words and a date. The words were, "Para quien llegue después," for whoever comes after. The date was 43 years ago. He climbed back up with the lantern and sat on the well cap in the last of the daylight and looked at the rancho, the standing walls, the stone corral, the scrub mesquite along the arroyo, and then took the photograph from his shirt pocket and looked at the woman standing at the gate with her hand on the post. In the background of the photograph, barely visible but there when you looked for it, was the carved stone cap of the well. The same cap. He had bought his grandmother's rancho. The understanding arrived not with force, but with the particular quiet of things that have been true all along and are only now being seen. Pinto came and sat beside him on the stone, which he did when he judged that the situation called for company and not for movement. That night, Aurelio pulled everything from the dry bottom of the well. The sediment, the packed debris of 11 abandoned years. And in the fourth bucket, he brought up found, wrapped in oilcloth inside a tin that had been wedged into a crevice between two stones. A folded document, a small tin of papers, and at the very bottom of the crevice, resting against the stone wall as if someone had set it there deliberately. A rosary, the beads oval with wear, the cross tarnished but intact, that he recognized from his mother's box because it was identical to the one he had carried for 9 years in his own pack. There had been 2 of them. His mother had kept one. His grandmother had kept the other in the well. In the tin of papers was the document he did not know he needed. His mother's birth record, naming her parents, naming his grandmother, Dolores Ibarra de Ruiz, and the rancho as her registered address. And beneath it, a handwritten letter, dated 6 months before his mother died. In handwriting he did not know, but recognized in the way you recognize a voice before you know whose it is. Something in the formation of the letters, something inherited. "I have tried to find you," the letter said. "If you are reading this, you found the rancho. The land is registered. The water is below the seam. Your grandfather knew where to dig, and I have written it down. The deed has both our names on it, yours and mine. Come find me if I am still here. If I am not, stay anyway. This land knows how to keep the people who keep it." Below the letter was a second deed, older than the one he had signed for $4.30, registered 43 years ago. In 2 names, Dolores Ibarra de Ruiz, and a second name, his mother's name, listed as co-heir, which made Aurelio, as sole surviving descendant, the heir to something considerably larger than what the municipal clerk had priced at $4. In the well cap's inscription was a message. In the crevice was the proof. In the paper, there was a fold of paper with an address in the town of Baviacora, 40 kilometers north, written in the same hand as the letter, dated 2 years ago. His grandmother was still alive. She opened the door before he finished knocking. She was 81 years old, and she looked at him for exactly 3 seconds before she said, "You have your mother's hands." She said it the way you say something you have rehearsed in case the moment arrived, and then you forget the rehearsal entirely because the moment is larger than what you prepared for. Her name was Dolores. She had spent 40 years trying to find the family that the Ibarras had taken from her, the daughter who had been kept from her by the particular cruelty of a family that decided, when her son's marriage ended badly, that his wife's mother had no further claim on anything, including the granddaughter she had never been allowed to see, including the son of that granddaughter, who she had not known existed until 2 years ago when a man in Alamos who had known her son mentioned, almost in passing, that there had been a boy. She had written letters. She had gone to Alamos once, at 79 years old, on a bus that took 7 hours. The Ibarras had told her there was no one by that name at that address. She had gone home and written the address in the letter and put the letter in the well and waited. "I got your letter," Aurelio said. "I know," she said. "Come in." She fed him. She showed him the rancho's original papers, which she had kept in a folder that had lived on the same shelf for 40 years, because she had never stopped believing someone would come for them. She showed him photographs of his mother as a child, of the rancho in its working years, of the well being dug, of his grandfather standing on the stone cap, with his hand raised against the sun as if saluting something only he could see. She was sharp and small, and moved through her house with the economy of someone who has learned not to waste motion. She asked him 3 questions about the rancho and listened to his answers with the focused attention of a woman assessing whether the person in front of her knows what he is doing. He apparently passed, because on the 3rd day, she said, "The water is 3 meters below the seam. Your grandfather left a diagram." She produced it from the folder. He studied it that evening in the kitchen, with the photograph propped against the wall, where he could see both the diagram and the face of the woman who had written the inscription on the well cap for whoever came after. They drove back to the rancho the following week in a borrowed truck. Dolores in the passenger seat with the folder on her lap, and Pinto in the truck bed expressing his opinion of the journey at intervals. She did not say much on the drive. She looked at the land the way people look at land they have been away from for a long time. Not quite with longing, because longing is for things you believe are gone. And she had never quite let herself believe the rancho was gone. When the truck turned onto the dirt track and the mesquite closed in on both sides, she put her hand on the dashboard. She did not explain the gesture. Aurelio did not ask. The days that followed had the particular texture of work undertaken by 2 people who do not yet know each other well enough to talk continuously, and so do not, and find that the work is better for it. She told him what she knew about the land, which sections of the arroyo held soil worth planting, which direction the spring runoff moved, where the old vegetable beds had been before the abandonment, where his grandfather had kept the cattle in the dry months when the south pasture gave out. She said these things the way she said most things, directly, without softening, as if information were a form of respect. He listened and remembered and asked 1 question for every 3 things she told him, which was the right ratio. She noticed the rosary beside the photograph on the windowsill on the 2nd morning and looked at it for a moment without speaking. Then she went to the folder and took out a photograph he hadn't seen yet. His mother, at perhaps 20, standing in nearly the same spot with the well cap behind her and a rosary in her hands, holding it the way people hold things they have carried long enough that the carrying is its own kind of prayer. She had one too, Dolores said. I gave them both on the same day, one for her, one for the well. Aurelio looked at the 2 photographs side by side. Then he nodded once, in the way of a man filing something important where it will not be lost. The morning ritual settled into itself naturally over those first weeks, the way rituals do on working land. Aurelio was up before light to check the corral and feed Pinto. Dolores arrived by the time the coffee was ready. They ate and then divided the work by what each of them knew, which turned out to be more complimentary than either had expected. She knew the history of every stone on the property. He knew how to work the present of it. Between the 2 of them, the rancho began to remember what it had been built for. The water came up on a Thursday afternoon in October, 6 weeks after Aurelio had first gone down into the well on a rope with a lantern at his belt. He had spent those 6 weeks working the seam from below, clearing the packed sediment by hand, bucket by bucket, following the diagram his grandfather had left, with the patience of a man who has learned that the land moves at its own pace, and that arguing with it costs more than it gains. Some evenings he came up from the well covered in pale dust and sat on the cap in the last of the daylight, too tired to move. And Pinto would come sit beside him, the way he did when he judged the situation called for company. And Dolores, on the days she was there, would bring coffee to the well without being asked, and set it on the stone beside him without comment, and go back to whatever she had been doing. It was a kind of conversation those evenings. the particular kind that does not require words. It came up the way the best things come, not all at once, but steadily, the way a truth works its way to the surface when enough of what covered it has been cleared away. First a seep, then a trickle, then the clean, cold water of the Sonoran aquifer that his grandfather had found and his grandmother had kept faith with for 40 years of waiting. Dolores was sitting in the shade of the main house wall on the repaired chair, with the folder on her knee and Pinto at her feet. She looked up when she heard Aurelio shout from the well. "Water," he said. She nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something she had always known was there. "Your grandfather said it would come," she said. "People told him he was wrong. He said he was patient." Aurelio climbed out of the well and stood in the October sun that had gone the color of good honey and looked at the rancho, the repaired roof, the cleared corral, the scrub mesquite along the arroyo that he had already begun to work with rather than against, and the well with its carved stone cap and its inscription that had waited 43 years for someone to read it. The photograph was propped on the window ledge of the main house, where the afternoon light fell on it and where he could see, from where he stood, the woman's hand on the gatepost and the rancho behind her, and the well cap in the background, and the eyes watching for someone who was, it turned out, always going to come. The Ibarra family sent a letter 3 months later, through a notary, contesting the second deed. Their notary cited administrative irregularities. Dolores's notary cited the original registration date, the co-heir designation, and the birth record from the tin in the well. And the matter was resolved in the time it takes to compare 2 dates and determine which one is older. The family did not write again. And so, where once there had been only caliche and silence and a dry well with an inscription nobody had read, there was now water and a working corral and the smell of the first planting along the arroyo, and an old woman who came 3 days a week and told Aurelio things about the land that the land itself had been waiting to confirm, where before there had been a man told since childhood that he belonged nowhere. There was now a man who knew exactly where he was. Did you ever have to let go of something you loved to receive what you truly needed? If this story reached you, leave your comment below. Subscribe to Cuentos del Viejo Campo, ring the bell, and share this with someone who needs reminding that the emptiest places sometimes hold the deepest water. Until the next story. A hug from this old field to wherever you are. A year later, a young man appeared at the rancho gate at dusk with a bedroll on his shoulder and asked if there was any work. Aurelio looked at him. Then he opened the gate and said, "Come in, there's water now." Content Countryside Tales Framwork. Zip, zip.